Hello and welcome to 2062 of the series. We will continue today with Iain McGilchrist, The Matter with Things, chapter 34, and this is a continuation of 2059. Last time we ventured into seeing what seeing is and how seeing is interwoven with the inner capacity to go into one's own self. Who one is important for developing seeing as a faculty. There are 3 times as many neurons going to the outside as taking in information from the outside to the inside. It's an activity. There is no such thing as a correct vision of something vertical outside of yourself. All seeing is an activity, taking the intention of the seer and many years of developing skill. A person congenitally blind cannot develop seeing, even though eyesight is restored. Even though eyesight is restored. This is coming from Kevin O'Regan and Alvin Newey. Seeing is a way of acting. It is a particular way of exploring the environment. This is quite another way of saying that attention changes the world. It is all about how we are disposed toward the world. The most important factor in deciding what becomes our cognition, what it amounts to, and what reality becomes. Reality is only the connection between one's inner and the outsideness. Something also that we also ventured even deeper with Terry Mark Starlov in the previous episode. 2061, the fractal self. As you might remember, we also talked about the kittens. The kitten that is not able to move, that horrible test. That kitten will not develop seeing in any normal sense. Seeing is far from static. It is a participatory, intentional act, and it takes movement. And we're learning more and more that the motor and visual systems are intrinsically linked. Intrinsically linked. Interconnected in the most profound way. From some aspects, they are even the very same thing. I like this from page 991. Measurement, then, may sometimes be better from a static position, and then we're talking about the classical measurement where you ignore the origo, where the origo is situated, and you assume a position from nowhere. It does serve its purpose, but it is an incredible limited take. It doesn't amount to much information. We, with that, will not know much about reality. The ability to take in would be severely limited. The grander, more allowing position is the position from everywhere. Where we acknowledge that there is a starting point and how we take in the world from that very starting point, not from an unknown, undefinable position, but from a real situated position in reality. We are situated, and that is what's so difficultly, so often complex, expressed in quantum mechanics, where it's said to be observer dependent. What is it to be observer dependent? Well, it means that there is a situation, situatedness of the seer, of the observer, and there's also, most pertinent, a movement. It's not still. So I like this. John Dewey wrote here, you can find on page 991. The reflex arc Upon analysis, we find that we begin not with a sensory stimulus, but with a sensory motor coordination. And that, in a certain sense, it is the movement which is primary. Listen to that. So true. It's like he was foretelling what recognitions and discoveries were to be made more than 100 years later. The sensation is secondary. It doesn't make much sense to say first we recognize the world and then somehow we analyze it, and on that base plan what will be our next move, where we go after that, so to speak. Rather, they are deeply interwoven, connected to each other long before it happens, so to speak, long before the event. Time and space are not really disjunct. They are partners, so to speak. And I'll continue to read on page 992. Cognition, too, inasmuch as it can be separated from perception, involves movement. By this, I do not mean simply that, as Galton first pointed out, we often thinking and by acting, though it is an important truth. An important truth. Know that we often think better when in motion, as the peripatetic school of Aristotle believed. On this topic, Nietzsche was characteristically expressive. Nietzsche! On ne peut penser et écrire qu'assis. One can think and write only when seated. By Flaubert. Now I got you, you nihilist. Sitting on your arse is precisely the sin against the Holy Ghost. Only those thoughts that come in walking have any value. Heidegger, whom George Steiner called an indefatigable walker in unlit places, would have agreed. Nor is it simply that when we do thinking language, we are using adaptations of the motor system. Though there is an evolutionary relationship memorialized in the neuroanatomy of the brain. In the neuroanatomy of the brain. Between speech and movement of the right hand. And it has even been claimed that syntax derives from ambulation. From ambulation. Now, what I'm getting at here is best articulated by Schelling, who, who made the point that every assertion is inseparable from the set of circumstances that gave rise to it. How true. There is no genuine proposition, not even presumably this one, he asserted, that has universal validity and that it could be separated from what he calls the movement, die Bewegung. The active engagement with the world, out of which it arises. Movement, he says, is the essence of knowledge. The essence of knowledge. Take away this vital element, and it dies like fruit stripped from the living tree. Fruit stripped from the living tree. Emotion, too, very clearly implies motion. The very word tells us that every emotion we experience is founded on a concern or care for some aspect of the world, implying a tendency towards action of some kind, action of some kind. The capacity to move and be moved by others may be fundamental to our conscious being. James Prescott was surely right to think that emotional development depend on movement. Ethics, the experience of moral values, quite clearly implies motion. Two, for such values are similarly rooted in active dispositions towards others and the world at large, eventuating in actions and inevitably tied to emotions, tied to emotions, tied to emotions. Motions are a bit of movement, moving somewhere. Just to have a body at all, according to Merleau-Ponty, implies motion. My body, he says, appears to me as an attitude directed towards a certain existing or possible task. James sums it up well. The fact is that there is no sort of consciousness whatever, be it sensation, feeling, or idea, which does not directly and of itself tend to discharge into some motor effect. Indeed. What would caring be without the active emotion or motion of doing something? Having care. The ontology of motion. I do like that. Change, flux, or becoming is the absolute, wrote the Indian philosopher Babir Singh. What we ordinarily call a thing is itself a process, a ceaseless coming to be and passing away. It is in fact possible that all bodies, animate and otherwise, depend for their nature on motion. On motion. we say that movement is composed of points, but it comprises, in addition, the obscure and mysterious passage from one position to the next, to the next. As if the obscurity was not due entirely to the fact that we have supposed immobility to be clearer than mobility, and rest anterior to movement. As if the mystery did not follow entirely from our attempting to pass from stoppages to movement by way of addition, which is impossible when it is so easy to pass by simply diminution from movement to the slackening of movement. The slackening of movement. And so to immobility. There is also an idea that we can have stasis without movement. And I think now we understood that that is quite impossible. I quoted Schelling just now on the relation between motion and thought, but his insight into their inseparability went further and deeper. At a second level, our knowledge of anything is embedded in movement, since, as Fichte too had seen, consciousness is not a fact or a thing, but an act. It is not just that it is a flowing movement, as James saw. It is the movement. It is the movement. It is that movement that unites me with the world. Motion is intrinsic to the betweenness and the directedness of consciousness itself. consciousness is always consciousness of something. Reaching out and going to meet something beyond the self. Not a self-enclosed Cartesian display, but a reverberative process already aimed towards the real living world, out of which it also comes. Creation of other is also creation of self. And in consciousness, nature, according to Schelling, is coming to create and to know itself. In more conventional terms, one might say both as subject and object, except that in this very process, that duality of subject and object reveals itself to be false and comes to be transcended, to be transcended. To become transcended. Transcendentalism. Movement, then, is not only implied in each and every aspect of mental life, as we have seen, but in the body and in consciousness. It is essential to nature, both animate and inanimate, to all existing things, from waves and particles onwards. Schelling, unlike Fichte, however, did not see consciousness as the ground of everything that exists. That role was occupied in his philosophical system by nature. By nature. By nature. Out of which consciousness arose, and from which it was inseparable. 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 nature herself, existence itself, was, according to Schelling, motion. Being itself, absolute activity. He wrote in the opening pages of his first outline of a system of a philosophy of nature. If we accept that being itself is motion, immobility becomes merely a fictional representation imposed by the mind for the purposes of calculation. Calculation! Oh dear, as Bergson realized, there never is real immobility if we understand by that an absence of movement. Movement is reality itself. Here again, Bergson seems to share an insight not just with Schelling, but with Leibniz. Thus, Bergson says, how could a moving object be in a point of its trajectory passage? Of its trajectory passage, it passes through, or in other terms, it could be there. It would be there if it stopped, but if it should stop here, it would no longer be the same movement. We were dealing with the same movement. We were dealing with. Listen to that. Compare Leibniz. Whatever moves is never in one place, not even in an infinitesimal instant. This is a version of the point that Zeno made in the paradox of the arrow. Of the arrow. But with the opposite conclusion, not that motion cannot exist, but that a dimensionless point or instant is a mental fiction. Well, see that as the Newtonian space. It's a mental fiction, nothing of reality. Impossible to use to understand space. This is a version. No. Compare Leibniz. Whatever moves is never in one place, not even in an infinitesimal instant. This is a version of the point that Zeno made in the paradox of the arrow. But, not to be forgotten, in the opposite conclusion, not that motion cannot exist, but that a dimensionless point or instant is a mental fiction. Something moves, says Hegel, in a similar vein. Not because at one moment it is there, here, and at another there, but because at one and the same moment it is here and not here. Because in this here it at once is and is not. The ancient dialecticians must be granted the contradiction that they pointed out in motion. But it does not follow that therefore there is no motion, but on the contrary, that motion is existent contradiction itself. I say that is incredibly grand. And that's a good point to put a little break. See here what page we have. 1994 now. So we'll go for some quotes here. And how movement is consciousness. And I really did it like this Bobby Singh Bobby. I'll check him out, I think. If we go to page 993, that's starting from the previous page, 992. Now what I'm getting here is the last line on that page, 992, is best articulated by Schelling, who made the point that every assertion is inseparable from the set of circumstances that gave rise to it. So everything is related. You cannot take out a syllogism or proposition as in the laws of deduction propounded by the Greeks. No, everything is interconnected. A whole book needs to be read through and through. Your whole body is engaged even in the twist of a little finger. Everything is constantly and from all directions interconnected. There is no free zone where no connectedness exists. There is no outer space or Tegmarkian lab where nothing is connected to anything else. Like in his hymn, his many worlds theory he got from Hugh Everett doesn't make sense. Everything is connected. Something can only become singular if it stems from the plurality. That's the only chance of singularity as well as stasis. Without the foundational movement, there will not be stasis. We will not have existence at all. And think about this coming from relational quantum mechanics. The direction and the movement cannot be separated from time. And the place, space, cannot be separated from where you are. There is no, you cannot peel off space, so to speak, from the rest of reality. If it's not included, it will not work as space. It will no longer be space. James sums it up on the second paragraph towards the end. The fact is that there is no sort of consciousness whatever, be it sensation, feeling, or idea, which does not directly and of itself tend to discharge into some motor effect. Into some motor effect. Into some motor effect. How would it be to have affection with never doing anything? Caress, help, smile, do things towards that person or persons. It doesn't make sense. How can you be generous without ever offering any money? And today, many people, Chalmers and many others, are claiming that consciousness is a fact, something emerging from matter or with enough complexity makes for consciousness. That is sheer impossibility, because consciousness itself is movement. And I like this harsh attack, well-due, on the Cartesian idea of a consciousness disconnected from the world. Of course, you can here see how the foundation for the brain in the that idea becomes much later, many centuries later. The Cartesian theatrical display, outside everything, not involved, walking around like a phantasm, a ghost. further down on the second paragraph on 994. Nature herself, existence itself, was, according to Schelling, motion. Being itself, absolute activity, he wrote in the opening pages of his first outline of a system of the philosophy of nature. Of the philosophy of nature. Motion is at the bottom. And I do like Leibniz here is coming before even quantum mechanics. Whatever moves is never in one place, not even in an infinitesimal instant. And this is, of course, a version of the point that Zeno made in the paradox of the arrow, but with the opposite conclusion. Isn't that grand? The Greeks came to the opposite conclusion. Therefore, because the law of the excluded middle and the contradictions cannot hold, therefore, there is no motion. So as is the René Descartes' idea of a disjuncted self gave rise later to the idea of consciousness floating about and above and somewhere else, not involved in actions. You can also see here how the Greek idea later gave cause to the Newtonian idea of a static space, where you can somehow tell what things are from stasis. Quantum mechanics have proven you cannot. There is no such thing as classical stasis. The Greek here made a mistake, but I would say how I see that the foundation for that mistake was already laid in some sort of discord within the very core of the bodily experience of the Greek. This is what I think. Yeah, the left hemisphere gained hold. Well, I think I'll end there. I say thank you very much for tuning in to this video Zoom. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or night, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.